The test is in 4 parts. At the end of the test, you will be given 10 minutes to transfer your answers to the answer sheet. Now turn to Part 1. Part 1.
You will hear a woman who has just moved into the area talking to a neighbour about problems she is having in her house. First, you have some time to look at questions 1 to 2. Now we shall begin. You should answer the questions as you listen, because you will not hear the recording a second time. Listen carefully and answer questions 1 to 2.
Oh, hi Ruth. How are you?
I'm sorry to bother you, Alistair, but I've been having some problems.
Oh, come on in. What's happened?
Basically, I had a leak from one of the pipes in the bathroom, and water started coming through downstairs, and the kitchen ceiling's badly stained. I've got the leak fixed temporarily, but I wasn't happy with the plumber, and I wanted to ask your advice.
Of course. Well, the first thing I'd say is make sure you choose a local company. That way, if things go wrong, you're close by and it just makes things easier.
Let me write this down. Right. Yes. The plumber who fixed things yesterday was from quite far away, but I chose him because his advert said he did emergency repairs.
Well, fair enough. You needed something in a hurry. But another piece of advice I'd give is try to avoid calling anybody on weekends. That'll really bump up the prices. Leave it till Monday if you can.
Well, yes, I think I can do that, because the temporary fix should hold. And obviously I'll need the ceiling plastered and eventually redecorated.
Yeah, sure.
So who would you recommend? Is there a directory?
Well, there's quite a good website covering this sort of work. It's www.plasdeco.com.
Is that with a K?
A C. PLASDECO.com.
Got it. Well, I'll try and have a look at that.
Yes, it gives price and quality comparisons.
Oh, that'll be useful. But I find personal recommendations really helpful as well. You know, you can find out whether you can rely on the company.
Well, I know a couple of reasonable plumbers and also some plasterers.
Great.
Before you hear the rest of the conversation, you have some time to look at questions 3 to 10. Now listen and answer questions 3 to 10.
There's a company called Peaks Plumbing. Now, they're a father and son team. They're really friendly and they tell you information you need in a clear way, you know, so they really understand what the problem is.
Right, well, that's good to know. Are they reliable?
Well, that's a downside. Every single time I've used them, they arrive late. And friends have said the same thing.
But is the work good quality?
Absolutely. Another one is John Damerel Plumbing Services. He's very good.
How do you spell the surname?
Damerol.
Right, got that. And does he do high-quality work?
Well, it's fine, you know, but I wouldn't say that was his main point. Basically, he comes out cheaper, you know, than other people.
I sense there's a but. Is he unreliable?
Oh, he comes when he says he's coming, but he's not very courteous, and he has the tendency to be messy, you know, so you have quite a bit of clearing up to do.
Okay.
So it's up to you. They're both good workers, and they won't cheat you.
Right. And you said you knew some plasterers?
Yes, a company called Simonson Plasterers did our living room last year. We chose them because we wanted some fancy work on the ceiling, around the lights.
So they can do a variety of designs?
You've got it. But it comes at a premium because they are more expensive, you know.
Than the others?
Yes. Or you could go for a one-man firm called HL Plastering. Harry Lester. He's fine, very reliable, if all you want is a simple job.
Do either of them do painting for you if you want? After the plastering's dried out, of course.
That's what I was going to say, but I should explain that Harry's quite old now, and so he avoids doing jobs which involve tall ladders, you know.
But my kitchen isn't too bad for that. I'd have to ask him if he's prepared to do it.
Yeah, sure.
So I'll start by looking at the website.
All those companies are on there, with their phone numbers, etc.
Thanks ever so much. You were such a...
That is the end of part 1. You now have 1 minute to check your answers to part 1.
Section 2. You'll hear an HR representative of Earn and Learn giving some information about her company. First, you have some time to look at questions 11 to 16. Now listen carefully and answer questions 11 to 16.
Welcome to all of you. Can everybody see and hear me? Good. I'm Sarah Connor, an HR representative of Earn and Learn. I have been asked today to talk to you about our company. So, for those of you who don't know very much about the company, let me start by giving you some basic information about it. Earn and Learn started nearly 20 years ago. It is not a charity but a for-profit company that enables promising entrepreneurs to make money while travelling. During the past 10 years, it has grown rapidly and has gained great influence in most countries of the world. We have a partnership with the school and take a large number of recent graduates from the business school. So if you are a recent graduate, I'd say you can consider applying to our company. Before your application, you might be curious about what sort of places you could go to. There are 4 main locations, but you also have the freedom to submit a different location, and if they can make the necessary arrangements, you can go. The first country Earn and Learn established locations was the US, where you may choose from multiple locations, as long as you can commit to their more rigid schedule of August to December. Also, you could do the Australia internship. That one is really cool. You work at a wildlife shelter and learn about the business practices of non-profit organisations. You do have to be willing to commit 8 months for that one, though. Perhaps that's a long time to be so far away, but I would say it is really an amazing opportunity. I don't know whether some of you are in decent physical shape. If so, the South Africa internship is another exciting one. You learn a lot about sustainable farming, but you would be doing some of the manual labour involved in maintaining a farm. Indeed, it's hard work, but I think you would definitely be able to do it. It may be wise to wait until after their summer is over, so it's not so terribly hot. In addition, there is a most recently established location in India. This one gives you more of a study abroad feel, given that they arrange a host family for you to stay with. In the other locations, you live in an apartment with other interns, so this is definitely a unique experience.
Before you hear the rest of the talk, you have some time to look at questions 17 to 20.
Regardless of where you go, at the end of the program you get a global travelling certificate, as long as you can explain your experience. You can provide a written log of what you did. I recommend writing journal or blog entries about what you do every day, or a weekly summary of each day. Of course, you don't have to write up a formal report or anything like that, and you need to apply for it once you have returned. Some students may want to know whether this is a paid internship. Actually, you have to pay for the flight there yourself. But you have the opportunity to create your own small business, which could earn you money if it's successful. So basically, you pay for it all up front, but when you're there, you can find ways to make money. That is to say, you pay for 2/3 of the cost up front as a deposit, and then give the final instalment 1 month prior to your return. Finally, I have to remind you that you need a health check before you go to make sure you're not going to spread any communicable diseases. In addition, before you go, you don't have to attend any meetings or workshops. You'll meet everyone you'll be working with once you get there. Okay, well, that's all I've time for today. Thanks for listening, and I'm happy to take any questions if you have them.
That is the end of section 2. You now have half a minute to check your answers.
Part 3.
You will hear a student called Pete talking to his classmate Dave about the presentation that he will give on environmental science. First, you have some time to look at questions 21 to 25. Now listen carefully and answer questions 21 to 25.
Are you just leaving the library now? I saw you get there at 8 a.m.
Yeah, I've been there all day.
What for? They hire a cute new librarian or something?
I wish. No, it's the presentation that I will give in environmental science the day after tomorrow.
What's it about? I heard you were really excited about the class. And Dr. Schnee also calls you for the arcane questions, as he calls them.
It's about environmental damage in the Yucatan.
Excuse me, what? Or is that where?
The Yucatan. It's a state in southeast Mexico.
So what's happening there?
Agriculture is having a really adverse impact on the environment. There are too many farmers doing too much farming. It's really destroying the forests and ruining the soil. Deforestation is a major problem there now.
How did you learn about this? I don't recall Dr. Schnee saying anything about it in lecture.
Yes, but my brother went there last month. You know, to look at the old cities like the Maya Indians built. That's what first got me interested.
Your brother Tom?
No, Dick, Harry's twin. Anyway, he told me how few trees there were now, and how much empty ground that grows almost nothing. He said the place looked more like the desert than jungle in some parts. It brought environmental damage, so I started looking for materials in the library. Here, look at this magazine.
What's in it?
It's an old issue of National Geographic. It includes interviews with tourists who have been there in the past few years. It's pretty bad. See the photos?
I see the photos, but one or two photos don't prove anything.
Then read what the article says. Right there. The first thing it points out is how soil samples show it's hard for anything to grow there. It says how an area of 21,000 square kilometres has lost most of its forest in the past 10 years. See, there are graphs. As the number of farmers increases, the acres of forest have decreased. It's an inverse relation.
Before you hear the rest of the talk, you have some time to look at questions 26 to 30. Now listen and answer questions 26 to 30.
So, how big is that state? I'm sorry, but I've never really learned the metric system.
It's bigger than the state of Massachusetts.
That's shocking. Anything else?
There's lots of else. Scientists say there's a growing area of about 10.5 square kilometres where nothing can grow at all. It's like the beginning of a desert.
Oh, yes. What Dr. Schnee called desertification. But why can't anything grow there? I've never really studied soil chemistry.
I'm just starting to look into that subject, but my sister Marie is a geologist, and she says the problem is that the soil has too much saline, with no plants helping to adjust the chemistry. Apparently, that's a common problem with soil types throughout the areas with rainforest. Once you lose the plant cover, it's difficult to bring it back. Reforestation is almost impossible, even if the land is not being used for other purposes.
Wait a minute. What is saline?
Saline is salt dissolved in water. Scientists who have gone there have taken measurements. They do this by gathering a sample of the soil and running a simple test that shows the ionization of the solution. The geology department in our own university has reviewed the soil at the site too. They're right. It looks pretty bad. The level of salinity is going up. But the plants that would solve that problem can't be planted in soil like that. There is a narrow spectrum of salinity in which the plants will grow.
And once you pass the threshold, there is no way to put the problem right?
Exactly. It's possible that no one can do anything to stop the trend now. And all because of human greed.
Wait a second. How do you know these scientists can be trusted? What kind of reputation do they have? Are they reliable?
Oh, they're definitely reliable. They include 4 members of the faculty from the geology department right here at MIT. Here, study these photographs and check the damage yourself. That's what Dr. Horst, who wrote the book here, did. He's newly appointed, but Dr. Schneer said that he's brilliant.
So, where are you going now?
I'm headed over to the geography department to borrow a map for my presentation. You know, this whole problem could have been avoided. The farmers there in the Yucatan...
Pete?
What?
Go take a break. Leave some studying for the rest of us.
That is the end of Part 3. You now have 30 seconds to check your answers to Part 3.
Part 4. You will hear part of a presentation about the early history of salt. First, you have some time to look at questions 31 to 40. Now, listen carefully and answer questions 31 to 40.
In my presentation, I'm going to talk about salt. In modern times, when we talk about salt, people may associate it with high blood pressure or increased heart risk, and many health experts warn that we should use less salt in our meals and dishes. However, we should not ignore its importance in our cuisine and even in early human history. Salt is one of the oldest, most ubiquitous food seasonings. The taste of salt is one of the basic human tastes. More importantly, salt plays an indispensable role in the health of human beings. For example, it regulates the body's acid-base balance. Because of its importance to survival, salt has often been considered a valuable commodity during human history. This can be tracked all the way back to ancient Greece, ancient Egypt, and ancient Rome, when salt was highly valued and used as a method of trade and currency. In ancient Rome, the busiest road leading to the city was the Via Salaria, which means the salt route in English. A soldier's pay, which partly consisted of salt, was known as salarium argentum in Latin, from which we derived the English word salary. A soldier's salary was cut if he was not worth his salt, an expression still used today. In fact, salt was not only the first condiment discovered, but also the first preservative. We know today that food goes bad because microorganisms in the food multiply in abundance, and a high salt environment is not conducive to microbial reproduction. Extremely high concentrations of salt can even kill microorganisms in the food. The ancients certainly didn't know this, but they did know that salted food can be preserved for a long time. The use of salt as a preservative can be traced to ancient Sweden. At first, hunting was the principal means of livelihood. In this case, meat supplies were unlikely to be frequent. What's more, fewer animals were available for hunting. In order to ensure the supply of meat, many families in Sweden began to raise animals in the surrounding forests during the summer, when the weather was suitable for animals to survive. These animals were fed every day until about 3 to 4 months later. That's in October. They were ready to be butchered for meat, and that was the only month when ancient Swedish people had fresh meat on their table. Then, with the continuous increase in productivity, people finally had some meat left. However, how to store the meat had become a headache, until someone invented a whole new way to preserve food: salting. People tried to keep meat from going bad by adding some salt to it, and it could be preserved for several months and even years. There was evidence that salt was widely used to preserve meat. Historical documents in 1573 recorded the Swedish king's everyday meals, mentioning that 175 pounds of meat was consumed each year, but over 150 pounds was salty. From this, we can clearly see the importance of salt in Sweden at that time. In addition, the documents also noted the annual sales of beer in Sweden soared during that period, and this must be related to high levels of salt in their food. Now, let's turn to the sources of salt. Where is salt from? Well, salt is common in nature. It has long been found that salt can be extracted from seawater, mineral deposits, saline lakes, brine, spring, etc., among which the two most important ones are oceans and basins. On the floor of the latter often lie deserts, where traces of salt can be found, such as the Sahara. Furthermore, the quality of different salt types varies a lot. For example, salt from seawater is always mixed with impurities, so after the salt is dried, the sediments and other chemicals need to be purified before eating. However, this is not the case with salt from spring water. We can hardly find any impurities, and the salt level is much more concentrated. Then, how did people distribute salt around the world? Of course, in modern times, we have various ways of transporting goods, but in ancient times, it was not the case. Take ancient Sweden, we mentioned before, as an example. Because of the heavy use of salt in the diet, Sweden could not feed itself and had to import large amounts of salt from other countries. In order to make sure they could buy enough salt from abroad, the Swedish had to attach great importance to shipping and keep it undamaged, as it was the most crucial way at that time. While in other ancient countries, in order to distribute salt to other places, groups of men were employed. They put bags of salt on their shoulders or backs and moved them to the surrounding regions, and gradually these people were considered as a mode of transport in early times. Later, with the improvement of traffic conditions, salt trade between different regions was boosted, and long-distance food trade was also promoted, making communication between different cultures more frequent and...
That is the end of part 4. You now have 1 minute to check